everyone, and thank you for joining tonight's presentation, Exposed: A Journey into Creative Vulnerability. We're so glad you're all here and appreciate you taking time this afternoon or evening to join us for this IPHF program. We're honored to welcome Ellen Friedlander, Los Angeles-based artist, educator, and co-director of the Pasadena Photography Arts. Excuse me. Ellen's work spans from bustling urban streets to intimate portraits, blending in-camera and post-processing techniques to create bold, complex images that embrace life's imperfections. Her photography has been exhibited across the U.S. and internationally. Notably, it shows at London's forgive me if I mispronounce this, Liton Yer Gallery, Biola University, and the Lancaster Museum of Art and History. Beyond her own projects, Ellen is a Key Pi Pi Fellow, mentor, and active organizer in the global photography community, as well as a co-producer of the Crit House podcast. So, Ellen, we're thrilled to have you tonight, and please take it away.
Well, I want to thank you, Stephen, for having me and the International Photography Hall of Fame. Really, it's a huge honor to be here. And I'm going to share my screen. Okay, thank you for being here. This is an amazing opportunity to share with you my journey, like many of you. I started out, my first real experience was in St. Louis. I worked for Jerry Tovo Photography. It was the most exciting thing that happened in my young life right out of college. I had moved, I had done lots of artsy things for the first 2 years coming out of school, and then I had met the soon-to-be husband, and I followed him to St. Louis. So there I was in St. Louis looking for a job, and Jerry Tovo was looking for an office manager. I could not have been more excited to be his office manager, and that's me in that little picture on the right bottom. Jerry let me do a few things in the studio, amongst even taking photographs of cracks in the street, which I thought was the most exciting thing I could possibly do for him. So that was my St. Louis journey, where I worked for many different, I started with Jerry with the photography. I ended up being a rep with a wonderful photographer, Dwayne Powell, and we did amazing commercial jobs with Anheuser-Busch and Brown Shoe Company and things like that. So I was it gave me that whole nurture, like I learned about photography in its commercial sense. But let me take you back now to where I started. I'm from a little town in upstate New York, and it's Old Forge, and this is the same view that I look at today when I go back home to visit. When I was little, for some reason, I really wanted to be an artist. Many of us want to be artists, and for some reason, I was part of that group. I did not have a lot to say. I drew, I painted, I danced, I figure skated, and around 16, I actually found the camera. And when I found photography, it was my way of communicating. It became my friend, my partner. And I went to college to study it. I went to Ithaca College, and I would come home on weekends with a 4x5 camera that I borrowed from the school. And these are my grandparents. And I would practice and I would make photographs. And this is part of my senior thesis. And Monty Gerlach, one of the professors, is on the left. And this wonderful woman who I photographed several times while I was a senior in college. This particular photograph on the right, when I made it, was an aha moment for me. And I know many of you as artists make work, and every once in a while you go, I feel like that was a stepping stone. Well, this photograph on the right was definitely a stepping stone for me. It was like, portraiture is important to me. And I felt really, really good about making this particular image. I'm going to flash forward really far. Lots of life. I moved around the United States. And then my husband and I and my 18-month-old son had the opportunity to move to Hong Kong. Hong Kong, from the little teeny weeny town that I lived in Old Forge to Hong Kong, even though I had lived in different cities such as St. Louis, was a mind expanding experience. Culturally, Um, on every note, you can see from this photograph, it's a huge city. It's laced with layers of color and history and um, just unusual things that I had not seen before. So it was very normal for me to always have a camera around my arm, even with a toddler or two toddlers. And so these are a collection of photographs as I was living in Hong Kong, going back to visit. And so I constantly was working on my eye as I was raising my children. And the single frame was very, very important to me because my aesthetic about making photography came from the very formal aspects. That's where I'm from. I'm from the rooted, you're gonna create like the Sam Abel school. You're gonna look at every corner, every part, every third. You're gonna really hone your frame. And so that has been something I've been working at for 40 years. Um, in 2014, I was back in Hong Kong and I was there for a month and made 4,000 photographs. I came back to the United States. I kind of felt I had made a couple of good ones, but as you know, one good photograph can take years in the making. Anyway, so this photograph, Bird Market, sat in my Lightroom for 3 years. And I was raising children. I was super busy. I was simultaneously dealing with a lot of normal life. And one day I woke up and I said, I need a mentor. And I was fortunate enough to see Jim Friedman's advertisement on Facebook. And I actually reached out to him. He came with a pedigree. He worked under Minor White. He had known Imogen Cunningham. And so I had a conversation with him after sending him 20 images. We had a conversation on this particular photograph back in 2017 that lasted an hour and a half. It was my first conversation around how I saw and how I was constructing photographs. And then he said, "Can you go out and do it again?" I was like, "I don't know." So that photograph became the anchor to work that I created with him called The Extended Frame, a collection of urban stories. And to make it really much easier, I'm going to read my statement and put my glasses on. The Extended Frame, a collection of urban stories, explores how humanity occupies space, using a multi-frame format to construct visual narratives that echo the fragmented yet hyper-stimulating nature of urban life. I am examining the tension between private and public, unity and isolation, the collective and the individual. No artificially generated content is used in any of these photographs. And as the images converge, they organically construct imagined environments, only to be disrupted by the visual fractures where frames meet. Both distinct and interconnected, these compositions challenge our perception of reality. They reveal unexpected connections and urge us to reconsider what is tangible in a world increasingly shaped by digital content. Excuse me, constructs. So this work I was very exciting to actually create. Um, I didn't, it's a very organic process that comes with creating a puzzle. I put a lot of photographs out there in my Lightroom. I play, and it's an energetic conversation that kind of comes out. This kind of gives you, I thought this would be interesting for everybody to kind of to see that, many of you are artists and I thought it was really interesting to see how long it took me to actually go from the single frame and then making something out of that single frame and then actually having a show in 2021 where I shared the work um, for the very first time in Escondido, a couple hours south of here. And it was really met with a very warm conversation. People hadn't seen this kind of work. They were really engaged, and it gave me a lot of impetus to continue. It was very exciting. So simultaneously, and the reason I'm here to kind of to share how do we get vulnerable? How do we crack open that inside that we're trying to share? Because basically, the being an artist or being a creative and getting the work out has to do with relating our personal experiences, which really tend to be a lot more universal than we think. So I moved to the United States with my children to help launch them. And I was met with some very, very difficult, emotional, traumatic um, circumstances. Those circumstances created a real isolation for me. I didn't have people. I didn't have anybody to talk to process. I had to make sure my children are okay. So once again, my camera became my very best friend. So when I would wake up or I would be really trapped in emotion, these type of images would come through me. Um, One of the things I've learned through this process of listening to my flow or the energy that needs to be released is not judge it, give it time, give it space. And so many of these photographs, again, sat inside my Lightroom and I knew they were there, but I didn't really know what to do with them. Some of the photographs, single images went out into the world. They saw some life, they had some feeling, but it really wasn't until I was given this opportunity to have a museum show this past January that the ideas that were percolating since 2017 kind of came together. And so I wanted to share a little bit about how I got a museum show. Really has a lot to do with community, has a lot to do with um, being available for other artists and mixing, just being open to the creative process. So as my daughter and I were sitting one day working at the computer a year ago, May, and working on something else, an email came over my Gmail, and it was two lines from Robert Benitez, and he basically said, "Dear Ellen, would you like to have a museum show, a solo museum show, and it would be start January 26th and end April 13th." I just have to share that I went into a catatonic state. I couldn't breathe. My daughter cried, and I really didn't know how to process that for a little bit. And the first email was yes, and then it was about getting him to visit. So Robert came to my studio, and again, I want to share like why you do many times you do things you have no idea why you're called upon to make the work. A couple years ago, I was called to take acrylic and take one of my photographs that I had made and slice it up and put it behind four pieces of acrylic. Another photograph was woven on the other side, and I took words from my diary and I wanted to create a sculpture. So I created this sculpture, actually created two sculptures, and they sat in my house for a while. And when Robert came to view my work, to kind of point me in the direction that he thought would be good for the show, he saw this piece and he said, "Go big." And I was like, wow. So these are much larger pieces from my show, The Soul Speaks. And these are the three pieces that are not self-portraits in the show. And they're very significant. Not that I understood that how significant they were when I was making them. And that's what I want to share right now. So I had made a photograph of my daughter's friend Nana on her 25th birthday. And we had done these pinhole portraits and they were really wonderful. And I was really thrilled to share this day with her quarter life. Um, I did not know that I was going to slice it up or put several of the photographs together to make this particular photograph at the time. But flash forward 2 years for the show, as I was starting to think about The Soul Speaks and the work I was going to make, I created this piece. I just said, I'm just going to make it. I don't know where it fits. I'm going to make it. This piece was the very first pinhole portrait I ever made when I tried to do pinhole portraiture. It was a 30-second hold, which is a really long time for anybody to sit still. But Colin Finley, a really good friend of mine, um, and a wonderful photographer, he graced me with his moment, and I took a few photographs. And so this photograph, I decided, oh, I think I'll slice this baby up. And this woman, this lovely human, Flora Hogman, I met a year ago at APAD in New York at the amazing photo festival. Flora is in her 80s, somewhere in her 80s. And as we were talking, she really took a liking to my daughter and I, and we ended up having lunch at her house. In that lunch, I brought my camera and I made photographs of Flora. I didn't know where those photographs were going to end up either, but in our conversation, we learned that she was a hidden child in the war, in the Holocaust, and that her identity had been changed many times in order to save her life. And that when she came to the United States, she became a psychologist so that she could learn how to process her own grief and her own identity and then help other people. So as I was putting my show together, these three works kind of came together. And as I look at the work in a larger way, the soul speaks. We have the first quarter of our life where we're making all sorts of decisions that we don't know why we're making them, but we're making decisions. We're alive, we're young, everything's coming at us, and it's kind of like starting our blueprint. Colin in the center, he's solid. He's in his sixth decade. When we're in our 50s and 60s, we're kind of using all of those decisions that we've made, and now we have to go, okay, this is who we are. Where are we going from here? And then we have Flora. She's looking straight out at us. She's owning every part of her. And so these three anchors of The Soul Speaks became a very important part of my museum show, which ties into going back and using my own experience of actually coming through some dark trauma and processing. And this was my way of sharing how I have taken my journey and put it through my creative process and shared with everybody in this show. So Twisted was a photograph I made in a really raw state. And one of my callings for this show was, how can I create work that is echoing and going to make people feel as chaotic and different as I felt? And so this piece was a real test to that. And it was really exciting when it felt like it was successful. So it gives you it shows you what it looks like, but then looks like on the wall. Raw is a photograph that I made in the midst of a lot of emotional trauma. Slicing it actually released a lot of that trauma. And hope is a combination of my daughter and myself. And I feel that through growing and becoming oneself, there's always hope. During the pandemic, I made photographs of myself in different states. And this particular photograph, these two photographs, I made at two different times, one when I was incredibly dark and one when I was full of hope. And they sat side by side, actually floating around my studio for a couple years. And as I was finishing up the show, one day I just looked at the work and I said, I'm going to cut them apart. I'm going to cut them out. I'm going to cut, and I cut the first one. I played it on top. And all of a sudden, this photograph started to come alive for me. But again, I wanted to do something a little different, and it called to be more sculptural, which you really can't see here, but both panels are lifted and lifted in different dimensions. So it has a more sculptural feel to it, which is where, as we're growing and changing, I think we're always sliding pieces off of ourselves and shedding layers. And so I feel that this is indicative of the growth process. And finally, this was the last piece that came through me for the show. And I had to make it twice. It came through me and it was much smaller. And I looked at it on the ground. These are all individual pieces. It's several different photographs. It's a puzzle of a piece to create. But as I looked at the smaller piece and I knew where it was going to go on the wall, I said, it's worth redoing and upsizing. And so I learned a great deal from upsizing a piece of work, which was also a lesson from the museum show. Um, so a lot of people came through MOA, the Museum of Art and History in Lancaster, when I visited, and periodically I would talk to people. And one day I was in the museum and this young girl was in front of this piece and she was sketching. And I said, may I introduce myself? I'm the artist. And she says, oh my goodness, she was a high school student and her assignment was to choose a piece of art from the museum, to make a sketch and then write about it. And she said, this is my favorite piece in the entire museum. And I was beyond, I mean, if this was the only experience I had at the show of having a museum show, this was everything to me, because her rawness, her vulnerability, and her exchange of energy, that she got the energy from the piece, that's why we make art. And I thought I would read my statement to get you totally in sync. I am drawn to the stories we carry, the way our past and present shape us, the ways we grow from both trauma and joy, and how, through it all, we continue to live, constantly evolving and recontextualizing who we are. Using techniques that include pinhole exposure and physical collage, I hold space for both chaos and control, unlocking the hidden depths that lie beyond our external facades. The cutting, splicing, weaving, and reassembling speaks to the literal way the brain builds memories and how a person is the sum of their experiences, be they messy, cathartic, traumatic, redemptive. Like the kintsugi tradition of repairing broken vessels with gold, my intention is to celebrate the fragments and understand their glowing, precious scars as formative and unique parts of a person's history. Each self-portrait and portrait tells a story of ongoing transformation, capturing not just a moment in time, but the process of becoming oneself. And this is the timeline to give you a little idea of how long it kind of takes for the energy of the art to be made, for the art to be reimagined, for the art to kind of take on new space because it's given opportunities to be seen. Um, I do not feel that this is done. I feel like this is on the road that will just keep continuing. So I wanted to share a little bit of my pinhole portraits. Um, I'm very excited that I now have my own natural light studio. It's a dream that I'm very grateful to have realized. When I started thinking about making my own type of portraits, I put on my 135 millimeter lens and my 2.0, it's a beautiful portrait lens. And then I took a few portraits and I said to myself, so many people can do this better than I. And so I had this little teeny weeny $30 pinhole lens and I plopped it on my 5D Mark III and I started to play. And I have to say that I have enjoyed this exchange of energy because it's it's a person has to trust me. They have to sit there. It could be 8 seconds, it could be a quarter of a second. It all depends on the person and that particular moment in time. But it's such a special experience to share. And that takes me to not not being actually, I'll just go back to 2017. I lived in Orange County in 2017 and I was really in my own little bubble. And I was taking a personal project class with Elleen Smithson. And I paid to have a one-on-one with her. And in that one-on-one, I brought all different projects. And she looked up at me, she said, "So, what kind of photographer are you?" And I said, "Oh my goodness. I do portraits, I do landscapes, I do documentary." She says, "Oh, okay. You are a fine art documentary photographer." I said, "Okay, I can do that." So, what I guess I'm saying here is that I don't think we should be restricted by anybody telling us what we can or cannot do. So, in 2024, I had a wonderful experience. I was able to be the artist in residence at the Shaker Village in Canterbury. I didn't know anything about the Shakers. They are the longest lived American utopian society. My daughter and I got to live on the campus in the trustees' home. It was an unbelievable experience. I took 5 tours in 2 days. I couldn't get enough of the experience of living in history. This is also a project that will someday see the light of day, but in the meantime, it's living very lovely on my Lightroom in my Lightroom. And here we are. And we can open it up to conversation and talking. But I am co-director of Pasadena Photography Arts, which is an online. We do forums and open shows. The Crit House is a wonderful. It's a wonderful YouTube channel Jeff Larson has put together to learn about other photographers and the process. I shared a couple of artist development workshops here. Keep Pie Pie is a wonderful it's for all artists, not photographers, all artists. So that's a wonderful group mentoring opportunities. And Startup Art Studio is Ray Beldner, who every Tuesday I meet with this group of artists, and then he brings in somebody to share information that we don't know. So it's all this is to say we can all this is to say that I think community is one of the most important aspects of being an artist.